VCs are looking for founders that will build a unicorn over the next 10 years. And the challenge for them is that right now, you look like every other company. You look undifferentiated, you look competitive, but you're not really like the world unicorn that is a no-brainer that everybody recognizes today. Today, all of us recognize Google, Facebook, Uber, so on and so forth as world leaders. But of course, if you watch any of the TV shows about their founding, and very much, the first few episodes is nobody cares about them, nobody pays attention to them. And so VCs always have this dynamic where they think to themselves, how do I assess the founders and evaluate which one will become that unicorn over the next 10 years? From their perspective, the VC is always meeting you and saying, will you become a unicorn in the next 10 years? Another way they'll try to think about it is saying, hey, will you double in revenue this year? And will you double in revenue again next year? And if you keep doubling every year, then you can become $100 million of revenue over 10 years. And so VCs have to assess and provide that feedback because they're looking at the founders, the founding team. They're looking at the strategy, whether the business model makes sense. So venture capital was invented by this person called Doriot. He is known as the father of venture capital. He was based in Boston and was a professor at Harvard. He also happens to be the founder of INSEAD. So for this guy, he's a French-American. And basically, he was asked to basically set up a fund that was asked to invest in small American businesses, primarily in technology and people that were coming back from World War II. And so he invested $70,000 in the Digital Equipment Corporation. Now, computers used to be the size of a whole room, right? DEC created computers that were the size of a fridge, right? The size of a closet. And so basically, they invested about $70,000 at a point of time. And a couple of years later, he was able to sell this for $355 million at an IPO, which was effectively a 5,000x ROI, which is also equivalent to about 91% of net internal rate of return. So basically, nice way of saying it is that the $70,000 that he gave effectively doubled every year until it became the IPO price, right? And so it's interesting because Digital Equipment Corporation became this billion-dollar company, became effectively the Dell or Razer of its day, right? In terms of like the biggest computer manufacturer. And then eventually, because at the time it's computers, and these closet-sized computers became mini-computers. And then these computers became even smaller. They became microcomputers. And those computers in front of you are considered microcomputers. And so DEC, which was the Apple of his day, got killed by Windows and HP and Compaq and Dell and Apple, right? So it's quite an interesting story that even the David that became Goliath can get killed by another David less than 20 years later. But this is, I think, one of the first few bets that were made. And so you have to understand that venture capital is part of a broader financial ecosystem, right? So obviously, you can imagine that institutions like endowments, like sovereign wealth funds. Now, obviously, there's venture capital that's investing in super high growth. There's obviously private equity funds and growth funds. And then obviously, there are public equities, right? So all supply of capital to the demand of capital for companies that require money to help them grow or compete or scale. And so what's important for you to know is that many of you may be familiar with private equity. So private equity is generally a fund that takes on medium risk. And basically what they do is they buy companies, right? They normally buy 100% and they buy control of the company. They may own several companies at a time. And then their job is to turn around it, improve their management. Some of them will fire the whole management team. Some of them will fire some of them will not fire, but do a lot of coaching and advisory work. But basically the key thing is to take over control, and then their job is to generate about 50% internal rate of return, because each company will become 2 to 3 times more profitable over a certain time period. Venture capital is an even more specialized version of private equity because there is much higher risk. They're going to invest in 20 companies, and in those 20 companies, they're not going to take majority control. They're going to take a minority, often around 20% investment of the company, and they may have representation on the board. But out of the 20 investments they make, they expect 1 to 2 of them to generate 20 to 100x return, and then the other 18. And so this 1 or 2 home runs that become Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, etc., will generate that massive set of returns that will counterbalance the losses from the other 18 companies, right? And so what's important to understand is that the VC funds are really investing based on power law rather than normal distribution. So what is the difference between power law and normal distribution? So for example, if I look at everybody in this class, and if I ask everybody to do a spelling test, an advanced spelling test, then most of you will have a bell curve, because some of you do really well, some of you do really poorly, and then most of you will be somewhat average. But what's important for you to understand is that the industry in many markets actually follow power law, because when I'm grading you on a bell curve, right? But if you think about, for example, entertainment, venture capital, startups, or even Olympic sports, is very different, right? So if you look at, let's just say running, for example, if you look at the whole world, probably all runners also show that same bell curve, right? Most people run 2.4 kilometers in about 12 minutes. And then some people do 9 minutes, and some people will take 20 minutes, right? I'm just giving an example of that bell curve of distribution for a 2.4 kilometer run. But if you think about it, there are some people who can run it really, really fast, right? They can run it in 5 minutes or 6 minutes or whatever it is. And those people can do it, they will win the Olympic gold medal. And so the person who wins the Olympic gold medal gets all of the outcomes. They get the brand sponsorships, they get the collaboration, right? And the silver medal person gets some of it, but not a lot of it. And by the time you hit the bronze, you're pretty much getting nothing. You're not on any adverts. And if you're not in the top 3, nobody cares about you globally. Similarly, if you look at entertainment, if you look at the entertainment industry, most people who are musicians are pretty good. Not super great, not super bad. If you go on Spotify, right? Whatever it is. But only a few people like Taylor Swift or Lady Gaga, who are at the very top, can monopolize the majority of the entertainment returns. They can become that superstar, right? And that's why when people talk about pop music, right? Why do we call it pop? Because the entertainment industry is trying to create popular music that will become that superstar, right? So that was Britney Spears back in the day. Now it's Lady Gaga. Back in the day it was Michael Jackson. But whoever can become that person, the number one artist, can generate and capture 80% of the global returns or profits in the industry, right? For that period of time. So similarly for startups, if you look at it, if you think about social media companies, how many social media companies are there left? There were once upon a time thousands and thousands of companies that are trying to be social media, right? And today we're down to 3, right? We're down to Meta, which has Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram. And then number 2 is you have TikTok, right? And then 3, arguably, you have Google with YouTube, right? So those 3 companies effectively eat up the vast majority of advertising revenues, 80-90% of advertising revenues for social media, right? So all the thousands of social media companies that are behind that are all nowhere near. So the power law is very important for you to think about it, because VCs are hunting for Olympic gold medalists. They don't look at you and say, wow, you are a good runner, who's a fast runner, who's working very hard, and you have such a wonderful underdog story. They want to, who are truly going to become number 1, or the potential to become the number 1. Everybody else is irrelevant. And so because of that, because VCs are hunting for home run returns, because these home run returns will compensate for the losses for everybody else. So when they're looking for it, for high growth rates, they're looking for somebody who can return 50 to 200x. So if they put in $1, they put in $1 million, you're going to get $50 million back, or $2 billion back, right? And then also they try to invest in a way where they can come in at a reasonable valuation, so that they come in with an equity price that is relatively fair from your perspective. So to give you an example, would be that Sequoia invested $60 million in WhatsApp, which is 2009, and invested it in 2011 and 2012. Facebook then acquired WhatsApp for $16 billion in 2014. So basically, effectively, in 3 years, Sequoia earned $3 billion, which is equivalent to 50x returns in 3 years. Now, at that time, WhatsApp didn't make any money. It had 450 million users. It was growing at 1 million users per day. So it didn't have any revenue at that point of time. So if you look at the price of revenue multiple, probably be basically infinite, right? But you're just buying for that user base. So as a result, you need to understand that VCs have kind of a structure to the entire organization. There's the limited partners, there's the general partners, and the startups. So limited partners are institutions, endowments, sovereign wealth funds, high net worth individuals, family offices, and then they basically choose to invest in the VC fund, whether it's Sequoia or Andreessen Horowitz or Benchmark. They invest in there and they invest 99% of the capital into the VC fund, right? And they enter a constitution with the VCs. Then the general partners will receive this capital, and then the GPs will then invest that money that they raise into, for example, 20 startups. The GPs, of course, are the ones who have legal liability. They are the ones who are responsible for the investment decisions. They're responsible for the coaching and advisory for these startups. And they're compensated 2% of the capital every year for 10 years to cover their cash costs. But they also receive 20% of the upside, if there's any upside, from the fund returns they generate. Whereas a limited partners will receive about 80% of the returns. And then again, out of the 20 startups that invested, you can imagine that in a high-performing fund, 1 or 2 of them will be home runs that become unicorns, and then 18 of them will eventually close down and provide effectively negligible returns. And so these limited partners are the ones that you can imagine are wealthy. They have a lot of capital. They're looking to invest. So you have sovereign wealth funds like the UAE, like Saudi Arabia, like Singapore sovereign wealth funds. They're investing. You can imagine endowments and foundations. So NUS and Singapore Management University also have endowments. And so does Harvard and the Ivy League. So there's endowments that are looking to generate a rate of return. And then there are corporations. So you can imagine that companies like Samsung or other global companies have cash on their balance sheet. And they're looking to invest in startups because they are Goliaths that want to understand Davids. And so they want to invest in VC funds that will either give them understanding of the upcoming competition, but also give them the ability to co-opt, right? And collaborate with upcoming Davids to fight other Goliaths, which is how we saw Microsoft, for example, invested in OpenAI. They believe that is a good ally for them to compete with Google as well as Apple. Then, of course, you have family offices that represent high net worth individuals. Then you have fund of funds, which are professional funds that basically bundle and invest in VC funds. And obviously, the high net worth individuals who are looking to invest individually and on their own. And so these LPs, obviously, they generally invest because they believe that there'll be higher returns over time. They will invest in venture capital funds, right? Because they believe that if they have that, they will help them achieve about 5% more returns over a 20-year period because of the diversification that the asset class brings. And so that gives them a high rate of return. It allows them to have diversification without having to invest directly in startups. They get to understand a little bit more about the geography and industry that the VC funds are investing in. They get to have a little bit of the eyes and ears to have a sensor network so that they can later invest perhaps directly into these startups. And lastly, they could also be using this as a way to learn how to invest directly in startups on their own eventually as well. And so what's important to understand is that VCs are both collaborative and competitive with one another, right? So if you look at in the US, Andreessen Horowitz, Benchmark, Sequoia, Union Square Ventures, Y Combinator, they actually compete with one another, but they also collaborate with each other as well. What's important for you to understand is that there's something called the startup financing cycle. And the startup financing cycle is basically saying that a startup in general starts from the left and grows over time. And on the y-axis is the revenue they have. And so on the left-hand side is when they start losing a lot of money because they're doing R&D, they are building the product, etc. So they're going through something called the valley of death because they just don't have enough money because they're losing a lot of money, don't have any revenue. And then eventually they start making more and more revenue over time, but they still may be burning a lot of cash and they become net unprofitable. They're burning a lot of cash to buy more growth. So even today, if you look at OpenAI, even though they have billions of dollars of revenue, they're also losing $1 billion of EBITDA because they're investing in capital expenditure, they're investing in hardware, they're investing in data centers because they're looking to stay ahead of Amazon and Google, right? And so if you look from left and right, the valley of death, as a startup, you may be raising money from angels. You may raise money from your incubators, like from your universities. You may be raising people from FFF, which what that means is family, friends, and fools. So when you are a new startup founder, you're raising money from your family, because some of you may have money from your parents. Famously, for example, Mark Zuckerberg, his dad, who was a dentist, invested in Facebook in the early stages. to give him some money to get Facebook off the ground. And it totally paid off for Mark Zuckerberg's dad, right? Because today that is a huge ROI on that early check that he wrote. Obviously, there are friends who invest as well. And so there are many people who will invest in you as a friend. And just last week, a friend of mine from my Harvard days reached out to me and said, hey, could you invest in my company as an angel? Because we're friends and we know each other for many years. And frankly, I decided that I will write a small check to him out of friendship. But also I do believe that he is a strong founder who has a lot of hustle and drive to make things happen. And of course, the last F means fools, right? Because there are lots of people who write checks because they don't really understand or they're very bullish or optimistic. And yeah, sometimes these hashtag fools actually turn out to win and be on the right side of history. But basically, they may not necessarily have as much experience in writing these checks. So angels are people who are a little bit more sophisticated. They have a sophisticated individual angel investment check approach as well. Then founders will raise money from early stage VCs. Then they raise money from later stage VCs. And then eventually they'll go IPO on, for example, the US New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ, the Singapore Stock Exchange, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, the Indonesia Stock Exchange. But there are many ways to go public. And then they become a public equities that allows people to trade on the public markets. So this is the progression from private companies that they grow from left to right. Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. We would also appreciate you leaving a rating or review. Head over to www.bravesea.com for member content, resources, and community. Stay well and stay brave.